I thought the worst part was being excluded from the trip I spent a year planning. But I was wrong. One morning, I opened an envelope from a lawyer. My own son had requested a competency evaluation against me. In the same week, someone called my workplace quietly questioning whether I was fit to work with children. I wasn't just being pushed aside anymore, I was being erased. And yet instead of breaking, something inside me shifted, because what they didn't realize was I had something left to protect, something worth fighting for. And I knew exactly where to begin. The coffee had gone cold 20 minutes ago, but I hadn't moved. I was still sitting at the kitchen table, my hands wrapped around the mug like it could anchor me to something real. The light in the room had shifted, late afternoon sun slipping across the tiles. But I hadn't noticed. Not really. My phone lay face down on the table screen, black now, but the words were burned into my mind. I didn't need to see them again. I'd already read them a dozen times, as if they might magically rearrange into something kinder. They didn't. We're bringing Isabella's mom instead. She's more fun. You bring the mood down. It was from Jacob, my eldest, my first, the one I used to sing to when he had nightmares, the one I worked double shifts for so he could play soccer in high school, the one who used to leave drawings on my pillow that said, "Best mom ever." Apparently that mom wasn't fun enough anymore. I didn't reply. My fingers hovered above the screen for a moment, but what was there to say? Instead, I sat still. And in that silence, my mind began to fill itself with all the things I'd done in the past year. 58 years old, living in a modest home with squeaky floorboards and a backyard that had long given up on growing grass. After Robert died, I thought that would be the lowest point. The quiet that followed was unbearable at first. Too still, too sharp. But over time I filled it with small routines. Part-time shifts at the library, morning walks, Thursday grocery runs. And then last year I had an idea. A trip. Not just any trip. A proper family getaway, the kind we never had when the boys were young because Robert always said we couldn't afford it, or didn't want to deal with complaining kids. I started small, researching cabins in the Smoky Mountains, looking up hiking trails and scenic overlooks. I clipped brochures marked favorite pages with sticky notes. I even printed out recipes. Family dishes I hadn't made in years because no one ever had time to sit and eat together anymore. Every penny I saved from the library shifts went into a special envelope in my drawer labeled Adventure. I remember writing the word in red ink just to make it feel more real. I even made a little photo booklet, a keepsake. Pages with photos of Robert holding Jacob on his shoulders, Caleb fishing with his grandfather, me holding a paper star from that one Christmas we made decorations out of old newspapers. I thought maybe on the trip when we were sitting around a fire pit I could share the stories behind those pictures. The ones they were too young to remember, or maybe too busy to ask about. But apparently I wouldn't be going. Instead, Isabella's mother, Camila, was the new choice. I knew her. Always well-dressed. Always smiling just a little too wide. She lived in a big house in the nicer part of town, went to yoga, had a wine club. The kind of woman who never had to worry about coupons or cutting cable to make ends meet. I could already imagine the laughter. The pictures. The stories they'd bring back while I stayed home and watered the plants. Then my phone buzzed again. A second message. This time from Caleb. Jacob told me about the change. Maybe it's for the best, Mom. You know how things get when we're all together. That one stung more than the first. Caleb was supposed to be the gentle one, the one who called on Sundays and remembered my birthday. He'd even brought me soup when I had the flu last winter. But now he too had decided that my presence was something to be managed, that I was a variable in the equation they didn't want to solve anymore. How did things get when we were all together? Did they mean the way I sometimes grew quiet when I saw Robert's smile in Jacob's face? Or how I'd pause before answering, remembering how quickly Robert's moods used to turn? Did they think I chose to be distant? That grief was a personality flaw? I looked out the window. Across the street, Audrey Freeman, my neighbor, was trimming her rose bushes. She looked up and waved, and I waved back, or thought I did. My hand moved, but it didn't feel like mine. The yellow paint on the walls suddenly felt too bright, too stale. The calendar still hung open to last month. I hadn't even flipped the page. Everything in the house seemed to hold its breath with me. I stood up slowly, the mug still in my hand, and walked into the living room. The table was still covered in plans. Maps, notes, a little spiral-bound notebook where I'd written questions to ask them. Do you remember when your dad taught you to ride a bike? Do you remember how we used to play, "What's your favorite memory in the car?" Do you know how proud I was when you graduated, even though you forgot to tell me the exact time of the ceremony? Pages and pages, handwritten with care. I ran my fingers over the ink. Some of it had smudged from when I'd written too fast. Or maybe from the tears I didn't admit were falling. This wasn't just a vacation. It was my chance. My hope. It was the quiet way I'd tried to say I'm still here. I still want to know you. I sat back down in the kitchen and finally whispered, I see. Not in anger. Nay, not even in sadness. Just acknowledgement. They had spoken. And I had heard them. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't going to argue. I wasn't going to beg. I just sat there, letting the weight of what I'd lost settle gently around me like dust that had always been there, just waiting for the right light to be noticed. My sons had chosen someone else, and I had to choose what came next. I didn't answer either of them. Not Jacob, not Caleb. The messages stayed on my phone like ink stains on a page, impossible to ignore but no longer worth the energy to scrub away. I sat there for a long time rereading their words, then simply let them sit. There would be no reply. Instead, I turned to something I could control. I stood up from the kitchen table, walked slowly into the dining room, and looked at the evidence of a year's worth of love and hope, spread out like autumn leaves. Maps, reservation, confirmations, tour, pamphlets, handwritten lists, recipes printed on colored paper. I gathered them carefully, not to preserve them, but to let them go. The first thing I did was open my laptop. The cabin booking, non-refundable of course, had been confirmed 3 months ago. I clicked the cancel button anyway. A pop-up appeared warning me that I would lose my deposit. Yes, proceed. Then the restaurant reservations, the horseback riding tour, the scenic train ride through the mountains, the rental car that was going to fit all of us because I'd imagined laughter and shared playlists on winding roads. Each one was canceled. With every confirmation email that landed in my inbox, I felt something inside me unclench. It was over. I walked back to the dining room table and saw the small spiral-bound notebook sitting right in the middle, exactly where I'd left it the night before the messages came. I picked it up, ran my fingers over the cover. A simple green notebook, the kind you'd find in the clearance bin at the store. But inside it was anything but simple. The first page was titled, Things I Want to Remember to Ask. Do you remember the first time you saw snow? What do you miss most about being a kid? What's the one thing you wish I had known when you were younger? I had filled pages with questions. Some light, some heavy, some I knew I'd never really get answers to. But I had hoped. I had hoped that the mountains, the distance from their routines, the absence of cell service would create a little pocket of honesty, maybe even healing. Further into the notebook were stories I had written down so I wouldn't forget. Stories about Robert. Not just the man he became, but the man he was before the drinking, before the long silences and disappointments. Stories of laughter, of nights spent dancing barefoot in the kitchen, of the way he cried when Jacob was born. I wanted them to know that their father wasn't always a ghost in the room, that there had been love, that their lives came from something real, not just from survival. I closed the notebook gently. I didn't throw it away, but I didn't keep it on the table anymore. I slid it into the drawer by the entryway, out of sight, out of the present. The next morning I woke up earlier than usual. The house was quiet. Not the suffocating kind of quiet, but a blank slate kind. I made myself a fresh cup of coffee and took it to the porch, watching the morning unfold without commentary, without expectations. At the library that day, I smiled and shelved books. No one asked about the trip. I didn't bring it up. After my shift, I went home and sat down to write. Not a reply to the messages. A letter. Dear Jacob and Caleb, I want you to know that I understand your decision. Truly, I hear you. You've both made it clear in your own way that my presence is more of a burden than a joy. And while that's not easy to accept, I'm choosing to respect it. I've spent a long time clinging to the idea that we were healing that time and effort might bring us back together. But I see now that I've been doing that alone. And I'm tired of being the only one trying. So I'm going to stop. Not out of anger, out of peace. I'm going to start living differently now, in ways that might surprise you. I wish you both well. Love. Mom. I stared at the words for a long time. Then I highlighted the entire letter and hit delete. They didn't need a letter. They didn't deserve one. Not now. The thing about silence is that people assume it's passive, that it's empty. But silence can be loud. It can be intentional. It can be the firmest boundary you'll ever draw. That night I poured myself a glass of red wine, cheap from a bottle I'd been saving for a special occasion, and drank it alone, barefoot in the kitchen. I turned on the radio, found an oldies station, and let the music wrap around me like an old sweater. I didn't cry. I didn't curse their names or beg the universe to make them see me. I just swayed, slow and quiet, like I was dancing with the woman I used to be. The woman who used to ask permission to feel hurt. The woman who tried to fix things that weren't hers to fix. The woman who kept reaching for people who never once reached back. I went to bed early that night, slept better than I had in weeks. When I woke up, the first thought I had wasn't about Jacob or Caleb. It was about me. What do I want? It was such a strange question. It had been years since I'd asked myself that. I made a list on a notepad. Not the green spiral one. A new one. What do I want to sleep in on Sundays? To learn how to cook food I actually enjoy. To plant a garden just for the beauty of it. To go somewhere no one knows my name. To be quiet. And for it to be enough. It wasn't long, but it was mine. The silence I had once feared had become the soil I would grow something new in. And I was just beginning to realize how fertile it was. The first thing I did that Monday morning was walk into my bank. Janet Waters, the branch manager, had known me for nearly a decade. She always greeted me with the same polite warmth, though I suspected she could tell this visit wasn't routine. I held a small manila folder in my hand, organized like always. But the reason behind it was different now. I'd like to close this account, I said as I slid the folder across the desk to her, the one labeled Emergency Fund. She looked surprised. Carolyn, you've been so consistent with this. Are you sure? I nodded. Very sure. She didn't ask more questions, only offered a quiet, of course, and began typing. While she processed the paperwork, I looked around the office. Everything here had always been in order. Pens lined up in the holder, tiny seasonal decorations in the corners of desks. I used to think of it as comforting. Today it felt like a room I'd outgrown. The balance is $1,472.28, Janet said, handing me the receipt. Almost exactly the amount I'd lost on the cabin deposit. I tried not to read too much into that. I'll transfer it into your personal savings unless you'd prefer something else, she offered. I'd like to open a new savings account, I said. For travel. Just in my name, not connected to anything or anyone else. Janet gave me a curious glance but didn't press. We can set that up. When the paperwork was done, she asked, would you like to set up automatic transfers to your son's accounts again? We can make it easier to help them that way. I met her eyes. No, thank you. I won't be helping them anymore. She paused just long enough to let the meaning settle. Understood. By the time I left the bank, something had shifted inside me. Not something loud or dramatic. It was quieter than that. But it was real, a steadying, a sense of standing on solid ground after years of balancing on shifting sand. Next, I visited the phone company. I need a new number, I said to the young man behind the counter. He wore a badge that said Kevin and had a patient smile that made me feel less self-conscious. "Okay," he said. "Want to port your old number over?" "No," I said quickly. "New number. Unlisted. I only want a few people to have it. By the time I left, my old number was gone. Erased. The only people who had my new one were my doctor, the library supervisor, and Audrey Freeman, the woman who lived next door and had brought me soup when I had the flu last winter, who sometimes borrowed my hedge clippers and always returned them sharpened." It felt oddly powerful knowing I had drawn that line, that I had chosen who could reach me and who no longer could. That evening, the first call came in. Not to my new phone, to the old landline still hanging on the kitchen wall. It was Jacob, of course. "Hey, Mom, just wanted to check in. Haven't heard from you. I hope you're okay. Call me back, okay?" I didn't answer. I didn't even listen to the whole message. The next day it was Caleb. "Mom, I'm starting to get worried. Did you go somewhere Jacob said he hasn't heard from you either? Just let us know you're okay." And then came the knocking. Wednesday afternoon. Sharp, impatient. I watched through the lace curtain of the front window as both of them stood on my porch. Jacob in one of his overpriced weekend jackets, arms crossed. Caleb looking less certain, hands in his pockets. They rang the doorbell. Knocked again. I didn't move. Eventually they left. I waited 10 minutes before moving from the window. That night I unplugged the landline, removed the batteries from the answering machine. It was time. The next morning I called a locksmith. Lloyd Hardy arrived promptly at 9 a.m., an older man with gentle eyes and the quiet efficiency of someone who didn't need to sell himself. "I'd like to change all the locks," I said. "Front backside doors. And I'd like a deadbolt installed on the back door, too." He nodded. Expecting trouble. "No," I replied. "I'm making space for peace." He didn't ask more. While he worked, I sat at the kitchen table and made a new list in the notebook I'd started. Things I want to do just for me. By the time Lloyd handed me the new set of keys, 3 of them each with a small brass tag, I felt like I was holding more than just metal. I was holding permission. That evening I walked to the community center. Audrey had mentioned a pottery class that started that week, and though I'd hesitated at first, I found myself drawn to the idea. "Come on," she'd said over the fence a few days ago. "You have good hands. They're strong and steady. You'll be great." I hadn't touched clay since high school. But that night I stood beside Audrey in the bright basement room, apron-tied, watching as the instructor, Lily, a silver-haired woman with a calm voice, showed us how to center the clay. "It's not about forcing it," she said. "It's about working with its nature." I smiled to myself. That line would stick with me. I tried to shape a bowl. It collapsed twice, but the third time it held. Lopsided, sure, but mine. Audrey patted my arm. "That's a good start." Walking home under the streetlights, I felt the cool air on my skin. It wasn't the chill of loneliness anymore. It was the kind of quiet that lets you breathe. Back home, I sat on the porch with my notebook and added to the list. Take a solo trip. Learn to cook just for myself. Plant roses. Read in bed without guilt. Let silence be my sanctuary. Don't explain what doesn't need explaining. Create something. Anything. The words came easier than I expected. They poured out like water from a faucet that had been stuck for years. I looked at the page for a long moment, then at the stars above the fence line. This was the life I was starting to build. Not in reaction to what had been taken from me, but in celebration of what I could still claim. I didn't need an invitation anymore. I was making my own space. And it finally felt like mine. The letter came on a Thursday. It was delivered by a uniformed courier, not the mailman. That should have been my first clue. The envelope was thick, official-looking, with the return address of a law firm I didn't recognize. 3 names stacked neatly beside a logo in navy blue. I signed for it with a shaky hand, shut the door quietly, and sat down at the kitchen table before opening it. Inside was a letter typed and formal, written in that cold, clinical language that strips the humanity from whatever it's trying to say. Jacob Foster, it read, had retained their legal services. He was requesting that I, his mother, undergo a formal evaluation for mental competency, citing a recent pattern of erratic behavior isolation, and concerning changes in communication and daily function. I reread the sentence 3 times before setting the paper down. For a long time I just sat there, the quiet of the house, my refuge these last few weeks, suddenly felt threatening, like I had been caught doing something wrong in my own home, as if my silence, my distance, my refusal to answer the door or the phone had somehow proven their point. Jacob didn't think I was grieving or reclaiming my life. He thought I was losing my mind, or at least that's what he wanted others to believe. I stood up slowly, walked to the kitchen sink, and turned on the faucet, letting the cold water run over my hands. The shock of it grounded me. When the phone rang, my work phone this time, the one I still used for shifts at the library, I answered out of habit. "Hello." There was a pause on the other end, then a voice I didn't recognize. "Hi, is this Carolyn Foster?" "Yes, speaking. This is Linda Marks from the Children's Services Committee. I'm just calling to confirm some concerns that have been brought to our attention regarding your conduct during recent library events." My chest tightened. "I'm sorry." "What?" "Well, we received an anonymous tip suggesting that your recent behavior has been inconsistent. That perhaps you've been having difficulty managing tasks or appearing distracted around young patrons." I couldn't breathe for a moment. "I've never had a single complaint in 10 years, I said, voice low but steady. "Oh, I'm sure this is all a misunderstanding," she said quickly. "We just have to follow protocol when these things come up." I hung up after promising to meet with the committee next week. Then I sat in the silence again, trying to process what was happening. They were coming for my reputation, not just my role as a mother. No, that had already been chipped away. They were coming for what I had left, my job, my sense of self, the respect I had worked hard to earn in a small town where reputations are slow to build and fast to ruin. The next day I met Audrey in her backyard. She was tending to her roses as she often did, humming softly under her breath. I stood there for a moment before I spoke. "Do you know a good lawyer?" I asked. She looked up sharply, concern already creeping into her eyes. "What happened?" I told her everything. The letter, the phone call, the feeling of being cornered, of being watched. Audrey set down her clippers and took off her gloves. "You need to call Natalie Wilson," she said. "She helped my sister when her son tried to force her into assisted living to take her house. Natalie doesn't just know the law, she knows the games." I wrote down the name. That afternoon, I called Natalie's office. A calm, efficient assistant named Jenna picked up and scheduled a consultation for the following Monday. The days in between passed like fog. I went through the motions, worked my shift at the library, cooked simple meals, checked in with Audrey. But everything felt distant, like I was walking through a version of my life that didn't quite fit anymore. Sunday night, I took out the small wooden box from the top shelf of my bedroom closet. Inside were a few old photographs, some birth certificates, and the original deed to the mountain house, left to me by my father when he passed. That house wasn't much, really, just 2 bedrooms and a wraparound porch. But it sat on a quiet ridge with a view of the trees that turned golden in the fall. It was the only thing I'd ever inherited. The only thing with my name on it that hadn't come with strings attached. I hadn't been up there in years, but just knowing it existed gave me comfort. It was my escape plan, my shelter, if everything else crumbled. Now they were trying to take even that, because make no mistake, that was what this was really about. If I were declared mentally incompetent, my assets could be controlled, accessed, inherited early. And conveniently, that house would become a family resource instead of a symbol of my independence. I walked to the living room and looked at the old black and white photo of my father on the mantel. He had worked with his hands his whole life, never trusted banks, always paid in cash. But when he died, he left that house to me directly. No will games, no drama, just trust. I won't let them take it, I whispered. Not out of pride, out of promise. Because it wasn't just a house. It was the last piece of a life where I had once been someone's daughter, not just someone's discarded mother. I stayed up late that night, sitting on the porch with a cup of tea, watching the stars and listening to the wind move through the trees. For the first time in weeks, I wasn't just sad. I was angry. Not loud, not violent, but the kind of anger that settles in your bones and makes you calm. The kind that makes you ready. I was going to fight. Not just to protect what was mine, but to protect who I was becoming. And I would start by showing them just how clear my mind really was. The message came on a Sunday morning. It was from a number I didn't recognize. Simple, polite, unexpected. This is Camilla Roberts. I believe we need to talk. Would you meet me for coffee? I'll explain everything. I stared at the screen for a long time. Camilla, Isabella's mother. The woman who had replaced me on the trip I had spent a year planning. The woman who had become the fun one, the chosen one. I hadn't spoken to her directly in years, not beyond the standard holiday pleasantries and strained small talk at birthdays. We didn't know each other well. We had never needed to. I almost deleted the message. I almost blocked the number. But something about her tone, reserved, not demanding, made me pause. And then I remembered what Natalie had said. Sometimes the ones on the sidelines see the most. So I responded, Maple Street Cafe. 1 o'clock. I'll be there. The cafe was quiet that afternoon, the usual buzz of conversation softened by the hum of ceiling fans and clinking teaspoons. I arrived early out of habit and sat near the window facing the door. I had no idea what to expect. Camilla walked in precisely at 1 o'clock. Not a minute early, not a second late. She looked the same as always. Elegant, put together, expensive without being flashy. Her blonde hair was styled to perfection, her jewelry subtle and tasteful. She carried herself like a woman used to being welcomed everywhere. But when she spotted me, something shifted in her expression. Her posture straightened, but her eyes flickered with discomfort. Carolyn, she said, sliding into the seat across from me, thank you for agreeing to meet. I'm listening, I said, not unkindly but firmly. She nodded, wrapping her hands around her coffee cup. I owe you an apology. A sincere one. I said nothing. Let her fill the silence. I know what Jacob and Isabella said to you. Or rather, what they didn't say. And I know about the competency petition. I raised an eyebrow. She glanced away, ashamed. They tried to bring me into it, to back up their concerns. They didn't say it directly, of course, but it was clear. They were building a case. Still, I said nothing. I want you to know something happened on that trip, she continued. Something that changed the way I see all of this. Shaman. She looked down, twisting her napkin between her fingers. It was the second night. We'd gone hiking earlier that day and everyone was tired. I went to bed early, but the walls in that cabin were thin. I could hear everything. Her voice dropped a notch, as if the words themselves were hard to say. They didn't know I was awake. Jacob and Isabella were in the kitchen talking, laughing even. She was telling him how proud she was that he'd finally taken control of the situation. That he had set boundaries with you. I clenched my jaw. Camilla kept going, her voice soft but steady. And then she said, and I'm quoting her here, she's like a stray dog that keeps following us around hoping for scraps. It's pathetic. The words hit like a slap, even though I'd already suspected the way Isabella viewed me. Hearing it spoken aloud from someone who had been in the room turned my suspicions into wounds. I'm so sorry, Camilla whispered. I should have said something sooner. I should have stopped them. Why didn't you? I asked. Her composure cracked just slightly. Because I wanted to believe it wasn't as bad as it sounded. Because I didn't want to cause a scene. Because if I'm honest, I felt flattered that they wanted me there, needed me there. I let that hang in the air. They told me you'd been difficult, she went on. That you called too much made them feel guilty. That you couldn't let go of the past. Isabella said you were obsessed with control. That you didn't respect their space. I folded my hands in my lap, resisting the urge to respond. I wanted her to finish. But after hearing them talk, I started paying attention. Really paying attention. I watched the way Isabella spoke about you when you weren't around. The little jabs, the manipulations. She's been working on Jacob for a long time, Carolyn. I think she sees you as competition, not just emotionally but financially. There it was. The real reason, well, she told Jacob that once you were out of the picture, they could focus on building a stronger family foundation. One that included me. And your money, I said quietly. Camilla nodded, ashamed. She knew how much I'd inherited from my husband. She did her research. She brought up Jacob's business, said they were looking for investors. She talked about starting a college fund for the kids they might have. They wanted me to be involved. Generously. And what did you do, I asked. I stayed, she admitted. I smiled. I played along. I let them whine and dine me, flatter me. I let them pull me in even while I watched them push you out. Because for a little while it felt good to be wanted. She looked up then, tears in her eyes. But it felt awful too. And it got worse. Isabella told Jacob that your inheritance from your father, your mountain house and the small trust he left, wasn't being put to proper use. She said it was wasted on you. I felt my chest tighten. That house wasn't just a piece of property. It was memory, safety, legacy. They're planning to challenge it, Camilla said. If the competency petition goes through, they'll move to take control of your assets. Legally, they've already spoken to a lawyer about it. For a moment, all I could hear was the soft clink of silverware and the hum of conversation around us. The world kept moving while mine narrowed into a tunnel. I took a slow breath. Why are you telling me this now? I asked. Because I was part of it, Camilla admitted. Even if I didn't say the words, I benefited from it. I let it happen, and now I can't live with myself if I don't try to make it right. I studied her. Do you want forgiveness? No, she said quickly. I want to help. If you'll let me. I know an estate lawyer, a good one. She helped me when my husband's stepchildren tried to freeze me out of his will. She's sharp. She knows how these things work. She handed me a card. I took it more out of instinct than trust. Before she stood to leave, she paused. One more thing. They've contacted your workplace. They're trying to get you removed from the children's programs. Said your recent behavior makes you unsuitable. I nodded slowly. That was the final piece. Camilla looked at me with something like fear in her eyes. Are you okay? I stood up, smoothing my coat. No, I said. Now I'm angry. And I meant it. I had been hurt. I had been dismissed. But this was war. They didn't just try to erase me from their lives. They tried to erase my identity, my purpose, my worth. They came for everything, but they forgot something important. I wasn't done. Not yet. Not by a long shot. Natalie Wilson didn't waste time. She welcomed me into her office with a calm, focused energy that immediately made me feel like I'd come to the right place. The walls were lined with tidy bookshelves and framed certificates, but nothing about her demeanor was performative. She listened. Closely. Not just to my words, but to the gaps between them. I laid everything out on the table. Literally. 3 years of messages printed out and placed into color-coded folders. Texts from Jacob asking for money when he was between jobs. Emails from Caleb thanking me for helping out again, followed by long silences. Snippets of voicemail transcripts where their tones shifted depending on whether they needed something. Let me guess, Natalie said as she flipped through the pages. They never said thank you when you said no. I nodded. This, she said, holding up a page, is not just inconsiderate behavior. It's a pattern. Consistent emotional manipulation tied to financial dependency. And it will matter. We built a strategy. First, a formal cease and desist letter to Jacob and Isabella. It would include documentation of their attempt to smear my reputation with the library, as well as a demand for repayment of past debts. Every transfer I'd ever made, whether for car payments, rent assistance, or emergency expenses, was listed with dates and totals. Second, a complaint to the professional licensing board overseeing Jacob's business. Natalie assured me that using legal threats to intimidate a family member, especially with no evidence, raised serious ethical concerns. Even if the board doesn't suspend him, they'll open a file. That alone could scare off potential clients. Third, a memo sent to his mortgage lender and credit card companies documenting the failed inheritance challenge and formal complaint. "We're not accusing him of fraud," she said. "We're just providing context. Let them draw their own conclusions." And fourth, perhaps most importantly, Michael Sand. She scheduled an appointment with a clinical psychologist for a full cognitive assessment. "You walk into that office with your head high," Natalie said. "You are not proving you're sane. You are confirming what we already know, that your clarity is your weapon." I left her office with a folder full of documents and a mind buzzing with equal parts anxiety and clarity. The next day, I drove myself to the psychologist's office, a modest building tucked behind a pharmacy. The woman who greeted me had soft eyes and a kind voice. She asked me questions, gave me forms, ran through exercises. I recited dates, explained current events, solved puzzles, remembered sequences. After an hour, she smiled and closed her notebook. "You're sharp," she said. "Very sharp." "Thank you," I replied, surprised by the sting of tears behind my eyes. That afternoon, I returned to my pottery class. It felt strange moving from the sterile logic of paperwork to the messy, uncertain rhythm of clay, but somehow the two complemented each other. In Natalie's office, I was carving out legal protection. Here I was shaping something softer. Resilience in a different form. Audrey greeted me with a warm smile as I took my place at the wheel. "Everything okay?" she asked. "I'm starting to think it will be," I said. "Our instructor Lily gave us a new technique to try, pulling the clay higher, creating a taller vessel without collapsing it." She walked around the room, giving quiet encouragement, her hands always moving. When she stopped beside me, she placed a gentle hand on my shoulder. "Don't force it," she said. "Let the clay guide you. Work with its nature." I pressed my thumbs into the spinning bowl, slowing my breath. "You don't force it," I repeated under my breath. "You shape it with care." The lesson settled into my bones. That's what I had been trying to do all along with my sons, shaping, guiding, hoping they'd grow into something good. But I had forced it, sometimes tried too hard to fix what refused to bend. Now I was shaping something else entirely, a life not built around their expectations, a structure with no place for guilt or second-guessing. A vessel made for myself by myself. The clay held its form. Tall, a little off-center but stable. Audrey leaned over. "You've got it." Later that evening, I returned home and sat down at the kitchen table. The surface, once cluttered with travel brochures and plans for a trip I'd never take, was now bare except for one new thing. A notebook. Not the old one filled with questions for Jacob and Caleb. A new one. Fresh pages. I opened it and wrote, "This is not about revenge. It's about remembering who I am. This is not about punishing them. It's about protecting me. This is not about being right. It's about being whole." I paused, then added, "And I will not apologize for taking up space in my own story." The house was quiet again, but it no longer felt empty. It felt earned, steady. Clay spun smooth under careful hands. And I was just getting started. It started with a voicemail. "Carolyn, this is Natalie. Call me when you can." There have been developments, nothing urgent, just confirmation that the wheels are turning. I called her back an hour later after I finished my walk around the neighborhood and watered the little lavender bush by my porch. There was no rush anymore, no impulse to react immediately. I had learned to take my time. When Natalie picked up, her tone was measured but unmistakably satisfied. I just got word that 2 of Jacob's clients pulled out of their contracts, she said. One of them cited ethical concerns in the termination letter. The other didn't elaborate, but I suspect the timing isn't a coincidence. I didn't say anything for a moment. My stomach didn't twist with joy or guilt. I felt something quieter, like the sound of a creaking rope finally snapping under its own weight. I thought you'd want to know, she added. Thank you, I said softly. It wasn't about ruining his business. That had never been the goal. It was about clarity, showing that actions have consequences even if they arrive in a whisper rather than a thunderclap. A few days later, I received a certified letter in a plain white envelope. I recognized the address on the corner. Jacob's apartment. I sat with the envelope for a while before opening it. Inside was a typed notice of divorce proceedings, filed by Isabella. She cited irreconcilable differences, a term so neat and sterile that it almost made me laugh. I could imagine the conversation. Isabella angry and disappointed that her plans for financial elevation had collapsed. Jacob confused, probably begging her to stay. She didn't want him anymore. Not without the power he had promised her. There was no apology, no message attached, just paperwork and silence. A few days after that, I got a small envelope from Caleb. No return address, but I recognized his handwriting immediately. Inside was a short note handwritten in careful script. Mom, I'm sorry. Truly, I've been thinking a lot lately. About everything. About how I let things happen without saying anything. About how I didn't defend you. Not even when I knew I should have. You were right to cut us off. I see that now. Please find enclosed a cashier's check. It doesn't cover everything, but it's what I can manage for now. I've also included a payment plan to cover the rest. I won't reach out again. Unless you choose to. With love. Caleb. I stared at the check for a long time. It was real. Not symbolic. Not a gesture. He had followed through. It didn't make things whole, but it did close a door. I didn't cry. I didn't feel vindicated. If anything, I felt something almost weightless, like my shoulders had dropped from a tension I hadn't even realized I was carrying. I placed the check and letter in a drawer beside the others. I didn't write back. That night, I lit a candle and sat on the back porch watching the wind move through Audrey's rose bushes. I brought my notebook with me, the one with blank pages I'd slowly begun to fill. I opened to a new page and wrote, "This isn't revenge. This is balance. This is gravity being restored. This is what happens when you stop asking for what won't be given and start protecting what's yours." I closed the notebook and looked up at the stars. For the first time in years, I wasn't holding anything back. Not disappointment, not anger, but not hope either. Not the kind that twists into desperation. I had hoped for too long. Now I was choosing peace over hope, presence over potential. The phone didn't ring that evening. There were no emails, no texts, no unexpected knocks at the door. Just the soft hum of crickets and the smell of rosemary drifting from the garden. Audrey's kitchen light flicked on across the way, a quiet sign of life, of companionship unforced and uncomplicated. I went inside and poured myself a glass of water. I didn't toast. I didn't need to. I simply stood at the kitchen sink breathing. The house no longer echoed with emptiness. It resonated with choice. I had chosen silence when their noise became poison. I had chosen distance when closeness became manipulation. And now I was choosing calm, even in the wake of loss, because it was a kind of loss. I had lost the idea of sons who would love me for me. I had lost the illusion that time and loyalty were enough to keep a family whole. But in that loss, I found something far more valuable. A return to myself. The next morning, I stopped by the library before opening hours. I brought in a tray of muffins I had baked the night before and placed them in the staff kitchen. Hazel was already there organizing the new arrivals. She looked up with a warm smile. You seem lighter. I smiled back. I am. She paused, then said, We heard about the complaint. And how you responded. You handled it with grace. The board was impressed. Thank you, I said. That means more than you know. She nodded, then gestured to the display table near the children's corner. They're starting a reading circle again. Want to lead it next month? I hesitated just long enough to remember that I didn't owe anyone an automatic yes or no. Then I said, I'll think about it. That evening, I returned home and added one more line to my notebook. Let healing happen on your terms, not theirs. The chain was broken, not snapped in fury, but released link by my own hands. And that I realized was the most powerful kind of freedom. It was late afternoon when I heard the knock on my front door. Not the hurried, impatient knocking I'd grown used to. This was tentative, soft, almost unsure. When I opened it, Camilla Roberts stood there holding a small ceramic planter. The glaze was uneven, the shape a little wobbly, but it had clearly been made with care. She looked different from the last time we'd spoken. Less polished, less poised. Her expression wasn't guarded anymore. It was human. I made this in class last week, she said quietly. It's not much, but I thought maybe you'd have a spot for it. I stepped aside and let her in. The living room was warm with late-day sunlight. She sat on the edge of the couch holding the planter in her lap like it was a peace offering. Which I suppose it was. I owe you more than an apology, she said. But I figured starting with one is better than not starting at all. I didn't rush to respond. I waited, letting the silence fill the space. It wasn't the kind of silence that demanded fixing. It was the kind that allowed truth to surface. I should have seen it sooner, Camilla went on. The way they talked about you. The way Isabella twisted things. I let myself be flattered when I should have been alarmed. You're not the first person to mistake manipulation for affection, I said gently. Her shoulders dropped. Still, I could have stopped it. I could have spoken up. I didn't. You did, eventually, I said. That matters. She placed the planter on the coffee table and looked around the room. I've never actually been inside your home, she said, almost surprised. I nodded. We were always around each other, but never really together. Funny how you can orbit someone for years without truly knowing them, she said. Not so funny when you realize how lonely that orbit is. She gave a quiet laugh, more breath than sound. I never thought I'd be the kind of woman who lost touch with her own center. But after my husband died, I started looking for belonging in all the wrong places. You're not alone in that. I let myself believe that being useful to someone, even if it meant being used, was better than being alone. Her words hit something deep in me. I had lived in that mindset for so long I hadn't even realized how much of myself I'd bartered away in exchange for inclusion. I'm trying to change that, she added. I joined a pottery class at the community center. Audrey said it's the same one you go to. She's the one who convinced me to try it. I smiled. Turns out clay is a better therapist than most people. Camilla chuckled. My first bowl collapsed on the wheel. I was embarrassed until Lily said, good clay needs to be tested. That's how it strengthens. I nodded. Lily says a lot of wise things. There was a long pause. Then Camilla looked at me with a softness I hadn't expected. I hope someday we can be something like friends. I didn't answer right away, but I didn't look away either. Let's start with kindness, I said. The rest can follow. She smiled and stood to leave. Thank you, Carolyn. Truly. After she left, I looked at the little planter on the table. It wasn't beautiful, not by any traditional standard, but it held something more important than symmetry. Intention. And sometimes that was enough. That week, I returned to the library for the monthly fundraiser. I hadn't planned to go. The last few months had made me wary of group settings of forced conversations and surface-level smiles, but Hazel had left a note in my mailbox with a simple sentence, "We'd really love to see you." So I went. The meeting room was decorated with banners and books wrapped in raffia ribbon. Children's drawings lined the windows, and a table in the corner offered cookies shaped like storybooks. When I walked in, a few heads turned, not out of judgment, but recognition. Hazel beamed. "There she is," she said. "Right on time." I hadn't realized how long it had been since someone sounded genuinely happy to see me. We spent the evening organizing raffle baskets, sorting donated books, and laughing about how none of us could tape wrapping paper without making a mess. No one brought up Jacob. No one whispered about my absence. They just made space. Halfway through the evening, a woman I didn't recognize approached me. "I hear you're a potter," she said. "Beginner." I smiled. "Very beginner." "Well, we're starting a kids' art series next month," she said. "Would you be interested in leading a few sessions?" "Nothing fancy, just helping them explore the basics. We'd cover materials, of course." I paused, surprised. I hadn't taught anything in years, but then I thought about the feel of clay between my fingers, the way shaping it calmed my breath, focused my thoughts. "I'd love to," I said. She grinned. "Perfect. I'll follow up next week." Later, Audrey caught me by the snack table. "You're glowing," she said. "I think it's just the cookie frosting," I joked. "No," she said, "it's something else." She handed me a small brochure. "This came across my desk yesterday. Community Center is sponsoring a local artist exhibit in Atlanta. Students and hobbyists, they're inviting submissions." I looked down at the brochure. Pastels and sculptures and ceramics. There was a small section labeled "First-Time Creators Encouraged." "I thought of you," Audrey said. "You've come a long way." "I'm still lopsided," I said. "Some of the best pieces are," she replied. "Besides, it's not about perfection. It's about presence." I tucked the brochure into my purse. That night I walked home with tired feet and a light heart. As I unlocked my front door, I glanced across the street. Camila's porch light was on. Inside, I could see her sitting at her kitchen table hunched over what looked like a sketch pad. I didn't wave. She didn't look up, but the sight of her there, quiet, focused, rebuilding, brought me peace. Well, inside, I poured a cup of tea and sat down at my own table. The ceramic planter sat in the center holding a small succulent I'd picked up from the farmer's market. It looked right there. I opened my notebook and wrote, "Sometimes the people you expect the least from offer the most. Sometimes bridges are built from clay, not stone. Sometimes forgiveness is not a grand gesture, but a shared silence." I looked around my home. Nothing had changed, and yet everything felt different. Because I was no longer waiting for someone to fix what had broken. I was learning to build new things, one piece at a time, one friend at a time, one honest moment at a time. The letter arrived on a Wednesday, folded neatly inside a blue envelope, with my name written in Jacob's handwriting. It was formal, deliberate, as if he thought the choice of paper might soften the weight of what was inside. I found it in my mailbox just after returning from the community center where I'd helped a group of kids glaze their first ceramic tiles. My hands still smelled faintly of clay and lavender soap. I sat on the porch and looked at the envelope for a long time before opening it. The sun was beginning to set, casting a warm gold over the railing, and the evening breeze stirred the planter Audrey had given me. I didn't feel anxious, just tired. Tired in that deep, quiet way that settles into your bones when you've already moved past the thing someone is just now trying to address. Inside the envelope was a 2-page letter written in Jacob's careful, familiar script. "Mom, I know this letter is late. I know it doesn't undo anything, but I hope you'll read it even if you don't want to answer. I've spent the past few weeks trying to understand how everything got to this point. How we let things get so cold, so strained, and I've come to realize that the answer isn't simple. But the damage is real and I'm responsible for a lot of it. I didn't mean to hurt you. Neither did Caleb. We were caught up in our own lives, our own pressures. That's not an excuse, I know. But it's the truth. And maybe we thought you'd always be there no matter what we did. Maybe we took your presence for granted. I know now that what we saw as distance from you was really silence. We created ourselves. We labeled you difficult when what you needed was grace. We dismissed your grief instead of recognizing your strength. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't even expect a reply. I just needed to say this. You were always there, always doing more than anyone ever noticed. And I'm sorry I didn't see it sooner. Jacob. I read the letter twice slowly. Every line felt like a thread pulled from some old worn fabric. There was no venom, no manipulation, no strings, just words. Maybe sincere, maybe rehearsed. But I didn't feel the need to decode them. I folded the letter and set it aside. Not in a drawer, not in the trash, just aside. I didn't write back. There are moments in life when silence is a gift, not a punishment. When not responding is the clearest way to say, I've moved beyond the place where this matters. That weekend, I received an email from Natalie. Subject line: Some good news. Carolyn. I just spoke with the library board. They've decided to formally recognize your years of service at the annual staff luncheon. Hazel nominated you for the Exemplary Contribution Award and the board unanimously approved. Apparently you've made quite an impression. I smiled reading it. Not because I needed recognition, but because it meant something had shifted. In all the noise, all the doubt, someone had noticed the quiet work I'd done. Someone had seen me. Not as a burden, not as a problem to solve, but as a person of value. I replied with a simple thank you, my chum. Later that day, I walked down to the small travel agency tucked between the bakery and the florist on Main Street. It was a little old-fashioned, still with paper brochures and laminated price boards, but I liked the feel of it. Real, tangible, like making a decision you could hold in your hand. The woman behind the counter, Janine, looked up and greeted me with a warm smile. Planning something fun, she asked. Yes, I said. Something for me. I'd been thinking about it for weeks. The trip I never got to take, the year of dreaming that had ended in silence. The Smoky Mountains would have been lovely, but I needed something farther now, something bigger. Have you ever been to Italy, I asked. Janine's face lit up. A few times. It's magic. Do you want cities or countryside culture or quiet? All of it, I said. I want to walk cobblestone streets and drink coffee that doesn't come in paper cups. I want to sit by the water and not rush anywhere. She pulled out a few glossy booklets. Venice, Rome, Florence, Tuscany. I looked at the images, but I wasn't choosing based on the pictures. I was choosing based on how they made me feel, the freedom they promised, the distance they offered. Not just from the people who had wounded me, but from the version of myself who had waited so long to be seen. We settled on a 10-day itinerary. A small group tour, just enough structure to feel safe, just enough space to feel free. When Janine clicked confirm, she looked up and said, Is this a special occasion? I smiled. Yes, I said. It's the anniversary of when I stopped waiting for permission to live. I left the agency with the itinerary in my purse, and a lightness in my step that I hadn't felt in years. At home, I opened my notebook and wrote, Book the ticket. Don't look back. Take photos only for yourself. Taste everything. Say no without guilt. Say yes without fear. You earned this. That night I stood in the hallway by the coat closet, staring at the suitcase I hadn't used since Robert's funeral. It had gathered dust. The zipper was stiff, but it still held. I wheeled it into the bedroom and laid it open on the bed. Not as a symbol, as a decision. I didn't know what Italy would bring. I didn't know if I'd cry in front of a sculpture or laugh with strangers over wine I couldn't pronounce. What I did know was this: I wouldn't be carrying regret. Only a passport, a camera, and a version of myself I'd fought hard to reclaim. Not for them. For me. The evening light was soft and golden, stretching long shadows across the backyard as I sat on my front porch, my hands wrapped around a mug of tea that had long since gone lukewarm. The air was warm, heavy with the scent of Audrey's blooming roses, which spilled over her fence in a riot of pink and coral. It was quiet. Quiet in the way that feels earned. Across the street, Audrey's porch light flickered on. I could see her through the front window moving about her kitchen, probably washing dishes or folding a tea towel. She looked up just as I glanced over and we exchanged a wave unspoken and easy, the kind that only forms after sharing both silence and truth. I opened the notebook I'd started the week I canceled the mountain trip. Its pages had become my sanctuary, filled not with longing, but with intention. A list of things I wanted without apology, a blueprint for a life not built around someone else's plans. I flipped to the final page and wrote slowly, deliberately, letting each word settle into the paper. I no longer wait to be invited. I create my own tables now. I set the pen down and exhaled. It wasn't anger that lingered in me anymore. It wasn't even sadness. It was something more whole, a sense of being rooted in my own choices, my own presence. I didn't need a reply to any letter nor an update on what Jacob or Caleb were doing. Their lives had continued in whatever shape they'd chosen. So had mine. But the difference now was that mine belonged entirely to me. A breeze moved through the trees, rustling the leaves and carrying the distant sound of laughter from a nearby backyard. Someone was playing music. Something soft, maybe a guitar, maybe just a radio turned down low. It floated across the fences, weaving between fences and hedges, until it reached me and made me smile. In the early weeks of silence, I had worried I would feel isolated. But I had never felt more connected to the world than I did now. Not through obligation, not through family roles or forced traditions, but through the gentle rhythm of real presence. Inside my suitcase sat packed by the door. Masan. Passport, tucked in the front pocket. Itinerary folded neatly on top of a stack of clothes I had chosen carefully. Not for practicality, but for how they made me feel. Free. Unapologetic. Curious. Tomorrow I would fly. For the first time in years, I was going somewhere not because someone else expected me to, or because I thought I might earn my way back into someone's favor, but because I wanted to see what else was possible. What beauty lay beyond the corners I'd spent so long confined within. I took a long sip of my tea and looked around the porch. The railing still had that one chipped spot where Robert had knocked a planter off the ledge years ago, the wind chime above the door. A gift from a library coworker, spun slowly in the breeze. Even the porch swing, which had started to squeak a little, felt like part of the stillness I'd made peace with. Nothing here was perfect, but it was mine, and it was enough. Audrey's front door opened then, and she stepped out holding a bowl covered with foil. She walked over and held it out toward me with a grin. "Lemon bars," she said. "Thought you might want a treat before your big day." I laughed. "You know me well." "I try," she said, sitting beside me. We didn't say much after that, just sat together, the two of us sharing a small, quiet moment as the sun slipped behind the rooftops. "Do you think they'll ever understand?" I asked after a while, though I hadn't meant to say it aloud. Audrey looked out at the street for a moment before answering. "Maybe. But even if they do, that's their journey, not yours." I nodded. I think I've finally stopped needing them to. That she said might be the truest kind of freedom. We finished the lemon bars and she left with a hug that didn't need words. I sat alone again, watching as the porch lights turned on one by one down the street. Not for me. Not because someone was waiting. Just part of the evening's rhythm. And I felt deeply and completely that I belonged right here. In this life. In this season. In this version of myself that had taken so long to emerge. I closed the notebook and ran my hand over the cover, then placed it gently on the side table. Tomorrow I'd wake early and head to the airport. But tonight, I would sleep in peace. No calls to brace for, no explanations to prepare, no apologies to draft. Just quiet. Just the soft hum of the life I had rebuilt with my own hands. Not the life they expected me to live, but the one I had finally fully chosen. If you've ever felt like you gave your heart, your time, your whole life to others, only to be pushed aside when you needed love the most, Then maybe Carolyn's story spoke to something deep in you. Have you ever reached a point where silence felt safer than asking to be seen again? Have you, too, stopped waiting to be invited and started building your own table? If this story touched you, please let us know in the comments. We'd love to hear your thoughts, your stories, your strength. And don't forget to like this video, subscribe to our channel, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss another story like this. Stories of quiet strength, painful truth, and the power of reclaiming your worth. You're not alone, and your voice matters here.